Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good stuff to ours, but hey, it's something. Okay, so now, the first thing I should say is, as of the time I'm recording this, it is June 5th. And by the time this episode releases, it will be June 7th. Which means that in June 6th, there is two prominent elections that will be taking place. One in Peru, which has the runoff for their president, and also the Mexican, legislative elections, basically the midterms for Mexico. So that's why I'm not going to be commenting on those races in this episode, other than just saying them right now, because I do not know what the results are right now. If I were to take a wild guess, I would say Pedro wins in Peru and Morena wins in Mexico, but that's pretty much all I can say about that. Another thing I'll say is, this episode is sort of a part of a podcast mini-series I'm doing, basically where I'm going to be looking over all of the, presidential, well, not all of them, a couple of presidential or other elections around the world, basically seeing how their elections are going to play out. There are 4 that I plan on looking at, and you can take a wild guess which ones those are. In fact, I've technically already said a couple of them, but you'll see why I chose this one to do first. In fact, this episode was going to be a lot earlier. This was originally going to be the podcast where I talked about Colombia, all the way back then. I was planning on talking about this topic back then, but, Colombia started becoming more of the mainstream news story, so I was like, well, let's see what's going on there. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, we're going to be talking about Arizona. Arizona plans executions using the same poison that was used in the Nazi death camps. That's a very interesting thing. Arizona prison officials have revived a decades-old gas chamber that are planning to use the hydrogen cyanide, the same deadly gas used by Nazis at Auschwitz and other extermination camps to kill people in death row. Apparently they found this out because Arizona's Department of Corrections spent $2,000 buying the ingredients of that thing. So basically they didn't buy the gas, they bought the ingredients to make the gas and were hoping that nobody would notice. But people did notice because that's the thing you would notice. And yeah, to show, this is just kind of the literal proof that this is literally the story that I think people who are anti-death penalty will be using for 10 million years. You are literally using the gas chamber gas to kill people. And I can't wait for the conservative rebuttal to that, because it'll be hilarious. Especially considering these are the same people that'll scream anti-Semite whenever you criticize Israel, and now they're like, yeah, let's use the gas chamber gas. I'm sure that's not a bad thing. Speaking of states, now we're going to talk about another state, Nevada. Nevada has made a very big change. There is a bill that was pushed by the Nevada legislature that would do 2 things. 1, change the Nevada caucus into a Nevada primary, and 2, make it so that it is the first primary of the cycle even before New Hampshire, which a lot of people have actually been advocating for because New Hampshire is a majority white state. Meanwhile, Nevada is very diverse, so it's more likely that that state would have a better understanding of how the presidential field will be than New Hampshire. Plus, people are just like, yeah, let's just change things up. Let's make things interesting. Now, personally, I don't mind either way. The only major electoral reform for primaries and stuff that I want is a primary that is held in the territories and DC that is completely binding. I'm pretty sure the DC primary might actually be binding. I don't remember. And DC does have 1 electoral vote, so I guess technically their votes do matter. But the territories don't, so let's try and change that, shall we? Okay, now this next story is because of Pride Month. You see, a thing that we've all known, but is being spread around again, Chick-Fil-A's profits are being used to push anti-trans state laws and kill the Equality Act. Christian millionaires, including Dan Cathy, an heir to the Chick-fil-A fortune, are behind one of the most sophisticated dark money operations ever to pass anti-LGBTQ legislation and stop the Equality Act. Chick-Fil-A has been assuring its customers for nearly a decade that it has stopped donating to anti-LGBTQ causes, only to be caught doing so time and time again. Now the fast food chain's billionaire co-owner is using the company's profits to fund hate groups that are passing anti-transgender bills all over the country and a campaign to stop the Equality Act from becoming law. Now, the reason why this thing was done, like people, like this news story was making headlines, because the same thing happens every time. Like, Chick-fil-A says, we're not donating to anti-LGBTQ groups, we're in fact very supportive of the gay rights, and then their company will be shown time and time again to be doing the thing that they claim they're not doing, and then people will do this big tap dance where all the people are like, oh, well, yeah, well, you might hate their politics, but you gotta admit it, at least their chicken is good. And then they'll make this big deal about like, oh, well, I wish I could stop giving money to Chick-fil-A for my gay friends, but, you know, their chicken's just so good. And it's like, their food is terrible, man. Their food is literally disgusting. Like, their food, like, I mean, literally, their food is garbage. I had never eaten there before, but then when I did, and it's like, people are making all this fuss over this? This food is literally terrible. Like, it's literally like this big hype up. Like, I guess it's because everybody was hyping it up like, this is the best chicken place in the entire state of North Carolina. And then it's just not. Like, if everybody tells you something is the greatest of all time, and then it's like average, it's just like, it's just terrible. Okay, anyways, moving on to the next story, because who cares about Chick-fil-A? Nina Turner. Now, there hasn't been a single poll that has been done in her congressional race thus far. Except now, we cannot say that anymore, because she just released a poll, like a self-poll, which like it was an internal poll, and it basically showed that 50% of voters liked her over all the other candidates. Now, a lot of people were quickly ready to jump on this and be like, oh, this is an internal poll, this is dumb. When, like, in fact, it's like, what? Like, internal polls, like, they might be skewed slightly, but internal polls will just, like, they're basically, like at most, it's like a 2-point, like, thing for, like, just because you're, like, mostly focusing on your own, like, supporters, but, like, they're not gonna make this huge, massive swing. It's just not gonna happen. Now, the thing that I was thinking is, like, it's very interesting that this is the literal first poll that has been conducted in this race. Almost as if the, like, pollsters don't want us to see any results. This race is literally a done deal. Doesn't mean don't support, or don't vote, or don't phone bank. But this race is literally a done deal. If any race was this lopsided for, like, any other candidate, people would just be like, just win already. Like, that's what they did for Biden. Like, Biden won, like, Super Tuesday, and they were basically asking, their best saying to Bernie, drop out. The race is over. The end. And he waited a bit longer. Like, and basically, the thing is, it's hilarious, because Shontel Brown, the person who's supposed to be Nina Turner's main opponent, who is literally not even being a factor in this race, like, they're pulling every stop to try and get her to, like, be the candidate, but it's not working, because, and you can tell it's not working because clearly it's not. The same people who tried to, like, revive Elliot Engel's campaign are trying to revive Shontel Brown's candidacy, and it's clearly not working. But one of the biggest things to show that the candidacy is, like, all this isn't working is because of, like, there was this huge controversy with Shontel Brown, and I was gonna wait until, like, I got the video, but I think the video should be out at this point. She was at an LGBTQ equality forum, you know, again, hashtag Pride Month, but she was at an equality forum and basically misgendered who she claimed was her transgender friend. Like, she was basically like, I forget the exact wording, but it was like, she was like saying like, I had a man friend who became a woman, and then he was so proud, and it's like, ooh, no. And a lot of people basically, like, even Chantel Brown supporters were pretty much like, yeah, disqualified, oops. Let's just say race is pretty much a done deal. Nina's gonna win. I can 100% predict she's gonna win. Next story is coming from the Squad. Well, some of the Squad. Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman have introduced a resolution in the House to make power a public utility. It's basically going to set up a framework that would guarantee basic utility services for all Americans while reducing fossil fuels. The bill is co-sponsored by Rashida Tlaib, Marie Newman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Mondaire Jones, Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, and Raul Grijalva. But the Squad are not socialists, they're actually Central Democrats. They're introducing a bill to basically make public utilities. And you're gonna sit here and claim that they're not socialists. The fact that this is being introduced at all is literally, like, I mean, I hate to say it, but, like, it's the proof that the people who were saying this claimed to be in favor of, or claimed to want, it claimed that the accelerationism worked. Not the 2021, the 2016 accelerationism. You see, remember the argument that they were making? That basically, like, if Trump won the 2016 election, the Democratic Party would be pushed so far to the left that it would be amazing. Well, the thing is, that happened, but those same people happen to don't want that. It's pretty obvious, because the same people who claim they wanted that, clearly don't care about it enough, because they hate AOC, and they hate Cori Bush, and they hate Jamal Bowman. I'm specifically referring to Jimmy Dore, but, like, you know what I mean. That whole crowd, they hate these people, and yet this is literally the proof that they wanted. They wanted this, right? They wanted a group of open socialists in the, like, Democratic Party, yes? Now they have it, and they still don't like it. It's so, like, dumb and idiotic. It's just, all it really is just people who don't understand anything and want to be, like, so altruistic. Anyway, speaking of the Squad actually got into another interesting thing. You see, remember the New York mayoral race? And how things were going a little bit crazy with that one? Yeah, well, the Squad has apparently started getting involved. AOC and Jamal Bowman are currently backing Maya Wiley, the person who was essentially one of the, I guess you could say one of the progressive options. You see, basically with the New York mayoral race, things have been going a bit crazy. And one of the things that it had that was very similar to, like, the Chicago mayoral race is that a lot of people claim to be the progressive in the race. Scott Stringer, Dianne Morales, Art Chang, Maya Wiley, all these people claim to be the progressive, and we're getting support from progressive groups. But each of these groups have now started, like, shifting their support, because it's pretty clear that things aren't even going the way they want them to be. For example, Andrew Yang originally was one of the people who was claiming to be one of the progressives, but at this point he's literally just given up on that. Like, people on the left just hate him so much, he's literally just effectively given up on trying to pretend to be one of them. In the latest debate, he literally said, like, he would govern like Mike Bloomberg. But then, it was discovered that he raped people, so yeah, a lot of them were not too keen on endorsing him. Like, I mean, he was technically, in my opinion, I guess not even in my opinion, like, he was basically the Warren Dem candidate. Like, he was, like, supposed to be, like, the not too progressive, but also progressive enough that you can easily be tricked by him. And Maya Wiley was similar in that regard. Like, she was sort of progressive enough that you could reasonably say, like, yeah, I support her. But also, she kind of, like, she was part of, like, she was a member of, like, the de Blasio administration, and it's, like, similar to that regard. De Blasio is fine, but then he's also, like, he's a city politician, so, of course, he's not perfect. And Wiley was sort of similar in that regard. And at this point, the race has pretty much gone completely off the rails. Diane Morales, who was originally the progressive sweetheart, is now not even considered that anymore. It's like, and at the point I'm literally just thinking, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'll withdraw my endorsement of her or just be like, hey, let's just stick it to the end. Because usually with endorsements, unless they like do something really, 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 really bad, which I don't know if Diane Morales, I should have looked into it, but I didn't, because at the end of the day, this really isn't. Like, I mean, the whole race is sort of my forte, but like, I don't know about the specifics. If a Diane Morales person like saw my website and then like emailed me or like told me like exactly everything they did, it's like then I'd probably make a more informed decision. But I see a lot of people still supporting Diane I guess, so it's like, eh. And while Yang was originally considered like he was the front runner pretty much, and he was going to win 100%, now he's pretty much pushed the race into an entire shit show. And it's literally just like, I don't know what's going to happen at this point. At this point, it's literally, we have no clue what's going to happen. Which is why there's now this huge, like, progressive support to try and jump on the Wiley campaign. Like Democracy for Now was like the only people who supported her at first, and now Jamal Bowman switched his endorsement from Stringer to her. Well, I mean, he withdrew his support for Stringer really early on, but like, and now AOC's endorsing Wiley, and now like the Working Families Party switched their full support to Wiley, even though originally she was like the third ranked choice that they had behind Stringer and Morales. And now things are just going completely off the rails. Like, I mean, at this point, I can just throw my arms in the air and just say I have no clue what's gonna happen. Anyways, next story, Anthony Fauci. Apparently, Anthony Fauci took some Hillary Clinton notes, and he has his own email scandal. Basically, Anthony Fauci got a ton of emails, like, not leaked. I guess, I mean, I don't know if they're leaked, but, like, it was the Freedom of Information Act, and, like there was a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that was filed by BuzzFeed News, and that was basically a ton of emails that were showing basically showing the ins and outs of like what the heck was going on with Anthony Fauci behind the scenes of the COVID-19 pandemic. While he was saying one thing in public, he was saying slightly different things behind the scenes. Basically, it was like a lot of things have been going on, because like there was even a point where people were doing a hashtag Fauci lied, people died. And basically, everybody was trying to figure out what the heck was going on, like, and including Fauci. Fauci didn't entirely know everything about the COVID-19, and he was basically, like, they were telling him stuff behind the scenes about, like, oh, what about the lab leak thing? And he was giving, like, I don't know, yeah, we should probably look into that, but we also shouldn't say it publicly. And then there was another email where it was like, oh, I'm flying to this place. Is it safe? And he says, yeah, it's safe. But then he's like, yeah, masks. We should wear masks. It was basically very confusing, and a lot of people seem to be reading whatever they like out of this. In fact, technically, I might be just reading what I want to read out of this. But basically, it shows that he was like he was trying to do a lot of things at once. He was trying to keep people calm, but also had to come to grips with certain things that were happening behind the scenes. And to a degree, it's like you can kind of understand why he didn't entirely say all of these things publicly, but also it's like it probably would have been better down the line if he just said these things publicly. Like, for example, the big thing that everybody brings up is like, he said masks weren't effective, and then masks became effective. What the heck? When it's like, Fauci only said that because he didn't want people to just go out and buy a bunch of masks when doctors and essential workers needed them more. But then it's like, then he should have said that. He should have came out and said, yes, of course masks are effective against the spread of viruses. However, I believe that the common blue mask that people wear should be available to doctors and essential workers a lot more, because they will need it a whole lot more. And if you do need to go out, you should probably just wear a cloth mask, like a simple like scarf or something that'll keep you from spreading it even more so. You know, do something like that instead of just saying, oh, masks don't work, in order to try and hide that fact. But anyways, now let's move on to the next story. The last story. This is probably going to be the last in a saga. The Israel saga. Not Israel in certain aspects, but the Israel election saga. because it seems that it is officially over. Well, not yet, because we still have until Wednesday until this actually happens. But you see, it has finally been revealed what parties are officially going to join the coalition to end Netanyahu's reign of terror. Yesh Atid, Resilience Party, Labour Party, Yisrael Bientu, New Right, New Hope, Meretz, and Ram. Those will be the parties that will push for the coalition to end Netanyahu's reign. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of, decently left-wing parties. The parties are mostly, center to center-left, but there are a couple of right-wing parties as well. Bennett's party and the Ram, they're the notable right-wing parties in this coalition, because, they were the trouble parties. Basically, for the Israelis, the problem was Ram, Yamina, and Joint List. Those were the problem parties, because those parties hated each other. So it was how are these parties going to work together? They managed to find a way. They found the two hard-right parties and decided coalition with them. And now this has led to some controversy, because a lot of people are really mad that Naftali Bennett is going to be the Prime Minister of Israel for 2 years before Lapid, the person who was actually better on the Israel-Palestine issue, is going to end up becoming the leader. And a lot of people are also a bit, not upset technically, but some of them might be a bit confused about Labour and Meretz joining this coalition, even though these two are openly left-wing parties. Now, these two parties, I have a feeling that the idea is that they're going to be trying to influence the government from within about, what the heck to do about the Israel-Palestine situation, but we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. Now that we have got all that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video, Nicaragua. Now, you might say, wait, I thought you were specifically going to talk about the Nicaraguan election. Yes, well, that was the plan. But the plan changed. I will still be talking about the Nicaraguan presidential election, but as you will find out, some of the things involving the Nicaraguan presidential election I can't necessarily talk about, because a lot of things are happening, and we also have to go in depth about all of the situations surrounding Nicaragua, and not just the immediate things. You see, in order to understand the immediate things, you have to also understand not the entire history of Nicaragua, but a decent amount of the history of Nicaragua. And of course, the current leader who is vying for re-election. So first, let's talk a little bit about Daniel Ortega. Ortega, for those who do not know, is a Nicaraguan revolutionary. Similar to a lot of other Latin leftists, there was a US-friendly administration that was effectively a dictatorship in Nicaragua. Daniel Ortega didn't necessarily like that, so he took up arms and led the Sandinista revolution to overthrow that individual, and then he basically took over Nicaragua for a little bit. But, like I said, for a little bit. He basically ruled uninterrupted in Nicaragua until 1984, where he decided that he was going to hold a presidential election, and in that presidential election, he won, although some people were a bit questioning because the elections were basically held just so that the U.S. would kind of get off their backs, because the U.S., believe it or not, was not so happy with, a socialist taking over Nicaragua. In fact, if you remember the television series The American Dad, you will remember that they actually talk about this a little bit, because Reagan literally gave a bunch of money to a militant group called the Contras, who were basically a group that opposed Ortega. They hated the Sandinistas, and they hated Ortega and wanted to get rid of him. And there was a lot of conflict, but there was also conflict in the political arena, though some people actually questioned the legitimacy of it. But in 1990, it was proven that Nicaraguans' general election power was good because Ortega lost. Now you might say, wait, you're happy that a socialist lost? No, I'm not happy that a socialist lost. I'm not even generally happy about But it just showed that these elections were fair because Ortega lost. He lost an election. Why would he rig an election so that he would lose? And the U.S. effectively got off of Nicaragua's back after he lost, because it's just okay, he lost. He's not a threat anymore. And the only reason many people saw that the Nicaraguans voted against Ortega was not because they didn't like what Ortega did. He instituted a lot of things. Land reform, wealth distribution, literacy programs. But it was simply because the U.S. basically just cut all ties with Nicaragua, and the Nicaraguan people were kind of noticing that. So the bitch were like, let's get rid of Ortega and try and have that prosperous capitalism. Ortega tried to take the loss in stride and basically tried to reform his party so he could try and win again next time. But that's when things started noticing. A lot of people were not really feeling the revolutionary energy anymore. But Ortega stayed firm in his convictions of his revolutionary, we're the revolutionaries and blah blah blah. But as he kept losing, he started realizing, maybe the reason I'm losing is that I'm stuck in this revolutionary era when I should be adapting my policies to the modern era. So he sort of started changing his mind on a lot of issues. Ortega, much like all these other Latin revolutionaries, was originally a hardcore atheist, but then in 2001, when he ran for the presidency a third time, he basically decided to ditch all of that atheism crap and then start instilling religious imagery into his campaign, also basically abandoning the revolutionary leftist rhetoric that he originally got popular with. He was saying, we need God and the revolutionary, and we need to pass through the sea and reach the promised land. But things were still stacked against him because the U.S. was still basically giving money to the people who were not Ortega. And things even reached a head after 9/11 because the ruling candidate basically was like, look guys, we can, the U.S. is angry and mad about these terrorist attacks. Do you really think they're not going to come after us if Ortega is the president? And it was even getting to the point where, there was a group that was, a group called the Sandinista Renovation Front, which decided to start leaving Ortega and oppose him. And they were basically starting to run candidates against him because they were Ortega, he's basically just a relic at this point. And they, in 2006, when Ortega decided to run again, this group ran an opposing ticket comprised of, they had Henry Lewis run against him, but since Ortega had basically become, a radical right, Christian to a degree, he was basically attacking Lewis because Lewis was Jewish and said that he was basically Judas and that he warned him you could end up hanged. Lewis did not end up being hanged. Instead, he had a heart attack. But all in the meanwhile, Ortega had basically given up any semblance of, revolutionary rhetoric and instead campaigned on reform. He even went so far as to have a Contra be his running mate. Another major thing that was changing was that he was now an avid person he was avid anti-abortion. Because, with the religious rhetoric, what else is he gonna do? But Ortega managed to win this one, and ever since then, people have been complaining that Ortega has just been steadily moving towards the right, and steadily become a whole lot more authoritarian. No, it's similar accusations that happen to a lot of other people, They're taking, they're ruling the world, they're taking over their country's democratic things. Ortega also instituted a law that would basically mean that he could keep running for re-election over and over again. A lot of the similar beats and phrases, but with some slight differences, because Ortega, he's not necessarily helping his case. And nowhere has that become more prevalent than in the current protests that are happening within Nicaragua. You see, this is actually kind of why I was so easy to kind of switch, talking about from Nicaragua to Colombia, because a lot of similar things have been happening in both. Now, here's the thing. Why are people protesting against Daniel Ortega? Well, there's technically a lot of reasons. The, one that is considered the Kickstarter of this one is that Ortega announced that he was going to institute a couple of Social Security reforms, but those reforms involved raising income taxes and payroll taxes while reducing pension benefits by 5%. And a bunch of protesters who range from elderly people to university students basically started protesting against these, basically, what the F, dude? What the heck, man? Why are you doing this? And unfortunately, as is the case with protesters, it's gonna be broken up by the police, and the police did that. And when the police were released, not just the police, but also people who were affiliated with the Sandinistas, the youth faction of Sandinistas, the Sandinista youth, they basically went out and killed 26 people. The next day, the vice president and first lady, yes, president and first lady, because Ortega's wife is both, I forgot to mention that earlier, but that's one of the things that got people a little bit angry. But here's what's happened. She made a speech mocking the demonstrators and labeled them as small groups, small souls, toxic, full of hate, bent on destruction of the country, and labeled the demonstrators as aggressors, and that the pro-Ortega groups that led this were good. As such, protests started getting more prominent, and a lot more people were being killed. One of the individuals being killed was a 15-year-old student named Alvaro Conrado, who was shot to death during a demonstration, and the hospital refused to let him enter. Ortega then announced that he was going to negotiate revisions on the reforms, but would not negotiate with the protesters, and would instead negotiate with business leaders, and saying that the protesters were basically being manipulated by outside forces. That same day, a lot of individuals were basically saying, cease the violence. Most prominently the Catholic Church in Nicaragua, who have effectively tried to make themselves moderators in this debate. But unfortunately, when one side is being violent and the other side is not being violent, and you say stop the violence, you know what side you're on. And a lot of the Nicaraguan paramilitaries knew what side they're on, because eventually the guns started turning on the church, because a lot of the members of the church eventually couldn't keep silent about this anymore. When the students are fighting with literally nothing, meanwhile the paramilitaries have literally machine guns, or not even machine guns. I don't know the specific type of gun, but they have guns. Meanwhile, students do not. Eventually you're gonna be going to the guy with the gun and telling him to stop, as opposed to the person with no weapon. And clashes kept happening because the police just kept wanting to kill people. When the protesters and Nicaraguan leaders like Ortega would try to mediate and stop the violence, then there would be a candlelight vigil for the people who died in the attacks, and then the police would then turn on those protesters. On Mother's Day, well, not our Mother's Day, but Nicaraguan Mother's Day, people who were parents of the Nicaraguan people who died, they would celebrate, and then the police would attack those protesters. The protesters, they shifted their goalpost a little bit after all that, and basically decided, okay, now that we got our Social Security forms out of the way, now let's try and get the people who were put in jail out of jail. And, that's not a thing that they're gonna do. They released some people, but haven't released all of them. It eventually got to the point where on September 29th, 2018, Ortega basically declared that protests were illegal, and that any protester would be met with violence. December of that year, the government revoked the licenses of 5 human rights organizations, closed the offices of cable news shows, and then beat journalists who opposed that. The hacktivist group Anonymous ended up getting involved and started getting a bunch of Nicaraguan government websites to basically go down, because they're don't do this. And a lot of these people supported Ortega. They loved Ortega. Ortega was their guy, and now they hate him because they're this is dumb. Why are you doing this? And many people have even just flat out called for Ortega to resign, which Ortega of course refused to do. He's even done a lot of dumb things, he tried to blame this on jihadism, saying that the protesters are essentially jihadists. A 14-year-old boy was going to school and then he got like tortured by the police who tattooed FSLN, which is the Sandinista like logo, on his like arm. 90% of businesses in Nicaragua participated in a general strike in order to release the political prisoners, which cost Nicaragua around $25 million a day. I'm basically rattling off a bunch of events that happened, but you know, this is reportedly one of the biggest, like, most harmful events that Nicaragua has faced since the revolution. Like, I mean, it's even getting to the point where people who are, like, they will, like, people, like, protesters will say that if the Ortega from the 70s knew about all this stuff going on, he would be on the side of the protesters, not on the side that he's on now. And this, combined with what was perceived to be like a very bad response to the COVID-19 pandemic by Daniel Ortega, has of course riled up the opposition to Ortega, and such, they're basically trying to run against Ortega and try to take him down in a chance that they, like, nobody thought was going to happen. People were legitimately, like, I don't even think anybody expected that Ortega would have any sound political opposition, and yet it seems that they want to have, like, it seems that there's enough chance for there to be a actual strong opposition against him. However, Ortega does not necessarily want that. Well, first, let's talk about who are some of the people who want to run as his opposition, because there's quite a few people who want to run as his opposition. Specifically, 10 people want to run against Daniel Ortega in the next election, which is this year. However, I don't know how many of them are going to make it to the election cycle, and you'll see what I mean in a second. First, let's go over them. First, there's a candidate named Americano Martin Termino Cantarero. There's really not that much information on him that I could find. Then there's a journalist named Miguel Mora. However, those candidates are kind of like not that much info about them. However, the next couple of candidates, there are some information about them, and they are notable enough to actually be talked about. First, there's Louis Flay, running under the Citizens for Freedom Alliance party. The interesting thing about him is that he actually used to be a member of the Contras, which I would assume that's the reason why he doesn't like Ortega that much. The party tries to position itself as like an anti-Sandinista liberal alliance, which tries to bring a regime of freedom into Nicaragua. I mean, that's an interesting wording. Okay, so the next candidate is Noel Vida. He's running under the Republic Alliance Party. It's a center-right coalition, which is led by him, who's a human rights lawyer by trade. Can't imagine why a human rights lawyer would want to run in this election. Next, we have economist Juan Sebastian Chamorro, who is running under the Civic Alliance for Justice and Democracy ticket. That is basically another anti-Sandinista liberal democratic alliance. Now, these next two are basically what seems to be the opposition that is left. The rest of these oppositions do kind of lean right, but these seem to be left-wing oppositions. First, there's Medardo Marena, who is part of the Nicaraguan peasant movement, which is a farm worker rights party, which has basically been had its leaders imprisoned and assassinated for a decent while. Next, there's George Enriquez of the party Yatma. Translated in English, it's Sons of Mother Earth. It's an indigenous rights party, which, very interestingly, is led by a bunch of, immigrants from Africa. So, this guy is very interesting because he, if you take a look at if you have the picture of his opposition, he sticks out like a sore thumb because he's the only black candidate. And he's an indigenous rights activist who, that's what his major opposition to him is, Ortega apparently not being so kind to indigenous folks. But the thing is, the opposition has mostly been focused around three people. All of the major opposition to Ortega has essentially been focused around these three people. First, we have Felix Madariaga of the Blue and White National Unity Party. It's a liberal party that seeks to democratize Nicaragua, and basically was trying to be the party that was like the people who were in charge of the like protests. That's the thing that they've tried to do, and naturally that makes him stick out like a sore thumb to Ortega. I would say he's sort of like the Juan Guaido of this place. He's a political scientist by trade, but he's basically, that's his thing. He's basically been the guy who is like tried to position himself as the big anti-Ortega candidate. He's been beaten and jailed by Ortega a couple of times, which is just bound to happen, apparently. Next, there's Arturo Cruz Jr. He is a candidate that used to be part of Ortega's administration. He was the ambassador to the United States from Nicaragua. He's is interesting because his party is technically the only one that can legally run candidates anymore. But we'll save that for when we talk about the last candidate. The last person who was seen as basically the only person who can actually legitimately challenge Ortega is Cristina Chamorro Barrios. An interesting fact about her is that she's actually related to the only person, well, I mean, not the only person, but like the person who beat Ortega in the first election that he lost in. It's interesting. But basically, she was the person who was seen as the only person who could legitimately beat Ortega. And the only reason being was that of all the candidates, she had the most name recognition. And you might say, well, I mean, if the opposition's so divided, then how can they actually legitimately mount a challenge? Well, that's where something interesting happens. You see, all of the opposition parties expressed an openness to unite under one ticket to combat against Ortega. Now, technically, that system passed, and they did not necessarily get to do that. However, they did get that extended a bit, so now they get to have another shot at trying to unify under one ticket. And as I said before, the opposition was starting to coalesce around the people who were considered the main opposition to Ortega. However, that's where things get interesting. You see, on June 2nd, she was arrested for reportedly money laundering. They actually raided her house 15 minutes before she was scheduled to do a press conference. And one thing that just happened this day is that Arturo Cruz was arrested, and basically it's an indication that he might be disqualified from running for president too. So yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to do this episode now and not wait till later. Maybe, like, I mean, you might say, well, wouldn't it have been best to do all this later? Well, no, I think it's best to do it now because effectively we're still in the same position that I was when I was originally making this episode. It was unclear what the opposition was going to look like, and it was pretty clear that he might just be throwing it all away, and that's what it seems to be looking like. Like, I mean, if you know anything about this thing, it's pretty clear what he's doing, and it's screwed up. If you were opposed to all this stuff when Colombia was doing it, you should be opposed about it now. You don't get to pick and choose what you can and cannot support. Now, I mean, like I said, I don't know what the opposition is going to look like. I don't know if any of the opposition is actually going to be worthwhile. But this is basically just to keep you informed about what the heck is going on in the world. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or check my articles on the Independent Political Report.